It was a sunny Thursday morning in Washington, D.C., and Karoline Leavitt was sitting in her office managing communications for her political campaign. On her desk was a tattered pocket-sized copy of the U.S. Constitution, which she carried with her at all times as a reminder that she believed in the fundamental values of the nation. As she was completing her press email answers, a new message came up on her screen. At the subject line, she hesitated. "You are invited to appear on the Ellen DeGeneres program. Topic: Generational Differences in American Politics." Karoline was used to heated political arguments as the youngest press secretary in the history of President Donald Trump's White House press office. However, because Ellen is a well-known entertainment icon with clear liberal values, her advisory team was wary of her offer. One of the helpers spoke louder. "She appears kind on video, despite the fact that she always grins when she jokes. Take caution. It might be a trap." There was a little pause before Karoline calmly responded, "If they want to make fun of me, I'll make the truth the comedy in their laughter." Unfazed, she was ready for the encounter. "Before you start, remember to leave a comment stating where you are seeing the story, and to subscribe so you don't miss the latest stories." When the famous opening song started playing and the stage lights went down, the studio audience applauded. Ellen left with a light step and a cool, collected demeanor, dressed in a blue jacket and fresh white sneakers. She waved to the crowd, her smile as brilliant as ever, but her eyes gleamed with a wicked sparkle that only her loyal fans would see. "Hello, everyone," Ellen began, her voice full of energy. "We are having a really special conversation today. A young, outspoken, and, let's be honest, fairly controversial guest." There were applause and laughing across the room. She served as a spokesperson for President Donald Trump. She is presently one of the most prominent young politicians in the Republican Party. "Some people love her, some might not quite get her yet," Ellen said with a little smile and a pause for impact, "but she will address us directly today. This concludes the prelude." She went toward the wings. "Please, Karoline Leavitt." The lights brightened, and the cheers were accompanied by whistles and a few suspicious murmurs. Karoline stepped out from the wings calmly. She didn't need any garish accessories or makeup, so she donned simple jeans and a deep blue blouse. But the most attention was drawn to the silver cross necklace that gleamed around her neck, a subtle yet obvious comment. She sat down in the chair across from Ellen, shook her hand, and smiled politely. As the stage lights blazed down on her, Karoline sat up straight and her eyes remained fixed. The cross necklace suddenly seemed to be a quiet challenge in a setting that is frequently antagonistic to conventional religious symbols. The audience remained uneasy. Whispers moved through the atmosphere like a pre-storm undercurrent. Ellen drew closer, her naughty eyes gleaming with her signature grin. "That cross," she added, pointing to Leavitt's throat. "You're young, talented, and working for a famous and controversial person," she continued in a gentle but scathing tone. "Is that the how you speak to your Trump team?" Leavitt inhaled deeply as she felt the cross's weight on her breast, which seemed to stabilize her against the barrage of derision. She said, "Ellen," in a quiet, low voice, and the audience erupted in laughter, but she didn't bat an eye. Ellen remained unfazed by the sporadic clapping from the audience. "Really?" She raised an eyebrow in question. "But Trump, he's not exactly a poster child for piety, is he? You wear that cross, but you work for someone many see as far from Catholic values." "This cross isn't a political prop. It's a reminder that I serve something greater. God, and He guides me, even when I'm standing beside President Trump." Leavitt grinned a little to restore control, not to dissipate. "How do you reconcile that?" Ellen questioned in a light-hearted manner, but every word was a sword wrapped in silk. "I'm not here to judge anyone, Ellen. I'm here to do my job, defend the values I believe in." She ran her fingertips over the shiny silver of this crucifix and touched it. The crowd paused for a while, as if taking in what she had said, and a middle-aged guy with a worn shirt nodded from the middle row. It served as a reminder that faith is about fidelity to the truth rather than perfection. Additionally, I believe that Trump stands out for the underrepresented laborers, farmers, and others whom Hollywood usually ignores. Sensing the shift in the atmosphere, Ellen pressed further. But Karoline, don't you think that cross is just a way to polish your image? I mean, politics. It's all strategy, right? With a bright smile and a tilt of her head, she remarked, "But don't you think that cross is just a way to polish your image?" and invited the audience to laugh along with her. Leavitt moved forward and fixed her gaze on Ellen's, saying, Laughter rippled again, but it was weaker this time. A young woman in the back row, wearing a cross bracelet, touched it spontaneously, as if Leavitt's words had triggered something within of her, as a wave of murmuring rushed through the room. This cross came from my grandmother, who prayed through hungry nights to feed her family. It's not a prop for votes. It's a promise to God that I'll live true, whether I'm in the White House or on this stage, Ellen said. She continued, "If you think faith is a strategy, then you don't understand it. Karoline, I get it. Although faith is personal, it becomes a statement when it is brought into politics with someone like Trump. You don't want to offend those who don't agree with you?" When Ellen saw that the audience wasn't quite on board, she turned around. Leavitt did not flinch. "Ellen, I don't fear upsetting anyone. I'm terrified of leading a dishonest life. In all honesty, I work for Trump because I believe he defends those whose religious beliefs are frequently disparaged by individuals such as yourself. I've learned from this cross that comfort is less significant than honesty." Alcohol and applause filled the room, but Leavitt's fans were more vocal this time. Standing in the corner, a veteran nodded proudly while holding his cap. Ellen was caught off guard by Leavitt's strength and tried to retake control with a joke. "Wow, Karoline, you're tough," she exclaimed. Liv sat up straight, the cross gleaming like a small flame, but she didn't return the smile. She winked at the crowd and said, "I'm just asking questions, not attacking." But her grin was insufficient to hide her discomfort. Once more, the audience clapped, this time louder and longer. Ellen looked wobbly for the first time and delicately tapped her fingers on the desk. "You can joke, Ellen, but I'm not here to play stage politics. I'm here to speak for those who wear crosses, believe in God, and support Trump because they see him as their hope." Even though Ellen DeGeneres is known for her signature grin, there was a glimmer of strain in her face as the crowd, still reeling from the last interaction, held their breath and stared at her. Every statement was like a spark that ignited a storm, thickening the air in the room. Karoline Leavitt remained motionless, while her cross necklace glistened in the darkness, acting as a lighthouse in the midst of the storm. "I'm not against faith," she said, lowering her voice as if casting a delicate net. "But that cross, when you bring it into politics, it's no longer personal," she said in a whisper to Karoline. "It becomes a depiction of a conservative and divided America. Don't you believe it deepens the political divide?" Like a velvet-tipped arrow, the question elicited an instant response from the crowd. She inhaled deeply as she felt the cross's weight on her chest, which seemed to reflect the prayers her grandmother had taught her. Some cheered, while others muttered, waiting for Leavitt to answer. "Ellen," she replied, her voice quiet but as cutting as a razor, "you say the cross divides, but you're wrong. It's not a flag of polarization. It is a beacon of hope for millions of Americans. I hope CARE pays you a visit. Wearing that cross next to a president who many perceive as representing division is a sign of division. Is that contradiction not apparent to you? Rather than holding on to outdated symbols, a progressive America seeks harmony." The crowd grew silent, save for a slight murmur coming from the back rows. People you and Hollywood rarely bother to mention. Ellen didn't skip a beat in raising an eyebrow. Ellen, you believe that the cross is out of date, but to the miners in Pennsylvania, the mothers in Alabama, and the veterans in Montana, it is timeless. She tilted her head without blinking, her eyes burning through Ellen and into the audience's hearts. Although she spoke in a silky voice, each word had a sharp edge that suggested Leavitt's faith was from a different time. As she talked, a section of the audience erupted in cheers, and Ellen noticed the shift in the mood and turned around. They wear the cross, pray in silence, and support Trump because he fights for them. People the system, the media, and people like you call backward. Do you not worry that it further divides America by excluding those who do not share your beliefs? She responded, I'm not saying faith is wrong, Karoline, as if to quiet the crowd, but it becomes a statement when you bring the cross into politics. The question was meant to corner Leavitt, so the audience clapped again, albeit more quietly. Leavitt's voice echoed as she added, You say the cross divides, but it's your mockery that divides. When you laugh at the cross, you're not just laughing at me. As if taking strength from a spiritual source, Leavitt rose slowly but firmly, caressing the cross and running her fingertips over its silver surface. She had just demonstrated to the world how Hollywood treats people like us when she turned to the crowd and said, You're laughing at millions of people, people who work hard, pray quietly, and believe God still guides this nation. The cheers were muffled by Leavitt fans as the room exploded. In the front row, a middle-aged woman with teary eyes nodded while clutching a tissue. She's right. A shaky crew member yelled out from backstage, the little voice resonating through the room like a stone upsetting quiet water. Surprised, Ellen. He managed a clumsy smile. Standing in the corner, a young guy touched his own cross necklace as though Leavitt had reawakened a long-dormant pride. Karoline, you're very passionate, she said, her voice trailing off so as not to offend. Before she could speak another word, however, a miracle occurred. The stage lighting, which appeared to be managed by an unseen hand, was centered on Leavitt's cross. It blazed like a sacred light and quieted the audience as though something greater were in the room. Leavitt took advantage of the situation. She said, Ellen, in a deep, low voice that sounded like a call from the depths. The cross does not divide us. Rather, it unites us in God's love, not in politics. Whether or not they support Trump, those who wear the cross believe in an America where religion is valued. You may call it conservative, but I call it hope. The audience erupted, the applause prolonged, interspersed with shouts of support, and Ellen, for the first time, seemed to lose her glow as a mother in the middle row hugged her daughter and whispered something as if passing on the flame of faith. She tapped her hand on the desk, forcing a smile, but it couldn't hide her unease. Her words swept through the room like a river, carrying the hearts of those listening. Ellen, now completely out of rhythm, just nodded and forced a weak smile, saying, Well, Karoline, in a slightly shaky voice, you've really heated up this stage. Karoline Leavitt sat poised under the stage lights, her cross necklace shining like a beacon amid the storm of public opinion. She attempted to change the topic, but the audience was no longer hers. They belonged to Leavitt and her cross. The audience watched with a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and growing respect as Ellen DeGeneres, still wearing her trademark smile, began to show signs of tension, her hands gripping the desk as if trying to hold on to control, and she cleared her throat before speaking again, this time softer, but as sharp as a blade in the wind. Ellen responded to Karoline, You talk a lot about religion and the cross as a source of spiritual power, but you know politics isn't a church. There is a lot of deceit, compromise, and power there. Are you really of the opinion that a religious symbol may or should affect your political decisions? Or is it really a beautiful tool for assembling controversial conservative rulings? The question was aimed at the core of Leavitt's beliefs, like an arrow. There was a lot of whispering in the room, and occasionally there was clapping that echoed Ellen's skepticism. But Karoline's didn't hesitate. She bowed her head and her hand, as if drawing strength from somewhere deeper than this stage, lightly touched the silver cross. "Ellen," she murmured, her voice calm and powerful, almost like a declaration. "The cross is more than just a decorative accent. It acts as a compass for me. Even in a political climate where everything may become hazy, where facts are skewed, and where the media distributes data selectively to promote their perspective, the cross reminds me that every decision must start with honesty and love for all people." She paused for a while and gazed at Ellen, even if it meant going against the grain. The room was silent because people were thinking, not because they weren't responding. Ellen replied, sensing that the balance was changing. She leaned forward and spoke in a low, sharp-edged voice. "However, Karoline, politics is about facts, not ideals. You work for Donald Trump, who has been criticized for dividing society, accused by many women, and made inflammatory comments about immigration. Do you sincerely think that Christianity influenced your decisions, or are you using your faith to justify a diametrically opposed political stance?" The accusation was presented in a sophisticated manner. Some of the audience clapped loudly. Karoline's gaze blew across a field of thorns like a wind, yet she did not move, resolute and unyielding. Telling Ellen, "I don't think politics is a power game," she said. "In my opinion, it's a way to assist people, particularly those who have been left behind by the system." She reached for the cross. The stage lights reflected off of it, creating a faint shimmer comparable to a promise. This cross is a reminder that protecting human dignity ought to be the first concern in all measures, from job aid to border security. President Trump has fought to restore jobs for working Americans, cut taxes for middle-class families, and stand firmly against forces that threaten our nation's independence, which is why I support him. What that is not blind loyalty. That's faith founded on what I've seen, not just what I've been told. Dispersed applause broke out from the audience. Though inconsistent, it was genuine enough for Ellen to notice. She had lost her authority. Ellen recognized the shift and modified her approach. The tone of her speech softened to one of conciliation. "I know what you mean, Karoline, but politics demands flexibility. Don't you fear that if you let religion dictate every choice you make, you'll become too rigid? Politicians have to compromise in addition to sticking to their personal convictions." It was a thoughtful question. Instead of being an assault, it is now an argument trap. Karoline smiled. It was not a defensive smile, but a deliberate one. "Compromise has a place in finances and strategy. But I'm not going to compromise on the truth. Human dignity is something I will not compromise. In addition, I will never compromise my religious beliefs. If politics is the art of the doable, then the cross reminds us of what is right, even when it is inconvenient." The crowd seemed to stop, but Karoline Leavitt went on as if she were walking into the middle of a national dialogue instead of a talk show. He reminded the audience that politics is not a chess game in which winning requires strategy. It is a basic responsibility to protect families, communities, and national values. Being a White House spokesperson, I am aware of how the media distorts the truth and how policies get branded just because they come from a specific political party. As if speaking to the millions of Americans watching from home, she paused and looked straight into the camera. "Furthermore, I understand that tax advantages for small businesses are not presents for the rich. Rather, they are essential to the survival of bakeries, corner stores, and other businesses that help their communities. The environment is not being harmed by unreasonable regulations that have been frozen. It is preventing government bureaucracy from suffocating farms in New Hampshire. Several audience members who had been silent until now began to nod. The stark divisiveness seemed to give way to a sense of pragmatism. Some policy issues cannot always be seen from a party standpoint. We talk a lot about justice, but we forget that it's more than just a catchphrase, Leavitt said. It is protecting the right to live, work, and study without being constrained by one's ideology. I support teaching skills in schools instead than imposing identity politics. When it comes to the education of their children, I support the rights of parents. Moreover, I don't believe that a nation with clear borders is xenophobic. A country that lacks self-control cannot be powerful, as history has demonstrated. There was an amen at the back row. Slowly, a man in a work uniform stood and gazed at Leavitt. It appeared from something in his eyes that someone had finally uttered what he had always thought but had never ventured to say out. Ellen DeGeneres felt that things were shifting around her. Her playful comments were no longer guiding the audience. She forced an uncomfortable smile and asked, "Karoline, do you really think every policy from the Trump administration reflects your faith? Have you ever had any disagreements?" Leavitt didn't run. Of course there was. I wasn't really on board. Discussion, adaptation, and correction are the main components of politics. Arguments by themselves, however, don't convince me. I continue because I believe it's critical to progress internally. Religion teaches me that. Something's flaws don't mean you lose up on it. Remain true to what is right, and fix it. The applause grew louder. Ellen remained silent, not because she was at a loss for words, but because she knew she couldn't bring the conversation back to the light-hearted tone it had started on. It was no longer a talk show. This was real politics, and faith had come in. Karoline Leavitt looked about her, not triumphantly, but with the poise of someone who has fulfilled their responsibilities. "You asked if this cross guides me," she continued softly, placing one hand on her chest. "The reason is that every time I speak, vote, or interact with the public, I am reminded that I do not speak for authority. I am an all-powerful force whose light never goes out, and I stand for the people." Ellen tapped her fist on the desk, almost losing control now, and her smile tightened. "Wow, Karoline," she said, her voice shaking. "You've really made things profound." Ellen tried to maintain her trademark smile, but it was impossible to hide the unease in her eyes or the way her hands uncontrollably clinched on the shiny tables. She cleared her throat, and her voice, now as thin as mist, still had a trace of hesitancy. According to her, "Karoline, you say the cross has been your compass during your political career. But like many others, I find it hard to understand how someone can wear a symbol of compassion and unfailing love while supporting policies that are thought to be harmful to immigrants, the poor, and the weak. The administration you served abolished DACA, cut back on assistance, and prioritized corporate tax breaks above aiding the working class." The question was like a spear to the very center of her ideals. The room was filled with whispers, hard gasps, and applause. But when Karoline Leavitt, calm as a still lake, touched the silver cross at her neck, it glinted in the darkness like an oil lamp. She replied in a voice as peaceful and serene as a church bell in the morning, "Ellen, the cross represents kindness, but it is more than that. It is an injunction to respect the truth, love your friend, and refrain from allowing emotions to influence judgment. Giving away limitless privileges is not what my faith views as social responsibility. Giving them the self-assurance to stand alone is the goal." She paused for a second before continuing, this time with a voice that was almost sharp. "Under President Trump, The jobless rates for Black and Latino people fell to their lowest levels ever. We expanded apprenticeships and offered incentives for investments in opportunity zones, areas that had long been overlooked. Instead of trapping them in cycles of reliance, we gave them opportunities and dignity. In one section of the room, a few people wearing work shirts who had been sitting quietly until now suddenly started applauding. "Don't watch it." Her eyes now shone like the sun breaking through dark clouds. She remarked, "I think America is a land of hope, but hope with rules. On immigration. We have nothing against immigrants. We oppose illegal immigration schemes that hurt both legal immigrants and local residents, as well as drug and human trafficking." Ellen frowned and answered as if she had been struck unexpectedly. Still, she tried to maintain her position. "Are you saying that all of the cuts, including those to Medicaid and SNAP, were made out of compassion? You honestly believe that the elimination of a number of environmental regulations was beneficial to the general population? Don't move it. Not denying, but dodging. Cutbacks without change are wrong, yet they are necessary to enhance the way systems operate. Policies are not meant to keep programs going forever. They concentrate on making sure that programs achieve their goals in order to help and then free. Those who need assistance should get it. However, if people are able to stand on their own, the government must permit them to walk freely and with dignity." The audience was no longer limited to talk show watchers. They were listening to politics, not populist politics, but politics based on principles and convictions. A full-eyed middle-aged woman in the front row clutched the rosary around her neck. A young man with a military jacket nodded slowly. He looked at Ellen and decided that it was better to do it with honesty than with violence. In politics, presenting gifts shouldn't be a competitive activity. There, people ought to compete to offer durable answers. And I am constantly reminded by this cross, which she hoisted once more while its light trembled under the stage lights, that aiding the poor is about lifting them up, not keeping them down. When Ellen saw that the room was tilting toward departure, she deftly shifted course. Her voice became softer, as if to soothe her guest and the audience. She smiled calmly and said, "I understand, Karoline, but politics rarely takes the simple road. It chooses short-term fixes. If you truly follow the cross, why not support larger social programs? Expanded Medicare, free college tuition, and housing subsidies all help the poor. Don't you believe that faith is more than merely endorsing conservative viewpoints?" It was a challenging question, but it wasn't overtly antagonistic. It addressed a sensitive topic, the tension between Christian values and conservative politics. Some audience members cheered, albeit not as loudly as before, maybe because they, like Ellen, were waiting to see if Light would trip. But Karoline Leavitt did not waver. She moved slightly forward, her eyes retaining an ethereal calm, and her palm softly brushed the silver cross, which now glinted under the studio lights like a live symbol of trust and resolve. "Ellen," she said in a voice like a church bell at dawn, "the cross does not urge me to choose the easy road. I'm supposed to select the right one. Giving up everything is not necessary to be socially responsible." Her eyes glowed as she said, "It's about creating a society where people have the chance to stand on their own, where the poor aren't locked forever in dependency." I once met a single mother in Rochester, New Hampshire. She lost her job because of the outbreak. She was forced to live in her car with her 2 young children. No social program provided assistance for her work. However, when tax rebates and investment incentives brought life to the industrial park north of the city, she was able to secure a full-time employment. She told me that faith carried her through, even when opportunity helped her get back on her feet. There was less restraint in the applause again. A woman in the front row touched her own cross necklace, her eyes sparkling. A young man in a worn t-shirt stood with his hands in his pockets as if Leavitt had said it for him. Ellen's head tilted, clearly protective. She smiled tightly and said, "Karoline, you're really inspiring, but politics isn't always about faith. It has to do with numbers, power, and money. Don't you think it's sometimes important to forego idealistic goals in favor of pragmatic ones?" With a little shake of her head, Leavitt's eyes remained unblinking despite the strong wind. "Ellen," she said, her voice low yet firm, "I'm not here to share a pleasant tale. I'm here to tell you the truth. Promises aren't traded for hope in politics. To serve there, you must have the bravery." She caressed the cross, reminding me that compassion, integrity, and a dedication to the American people must be the foundations of every choice I make, from budgets to borders. She paused at the right moment and remarked, "You can call me conservative. Some may view me as radical, but I think it is noble and a citizen's sacred duty to put God and her country before herself." A veteran near the back abruptly stood up and saluted formally. Others nodded in silence. The whole studio, which was formerly Ellen's cozy space, has been turned into a forum for the younger generation's emerging conservative voice. Ellen paused for a second. She didn't interrupt or respond. The host's silence at that moment was the clearest evidence of what Karoline Leavitt had just said. In its purest form, faith doesn't need to be defended. The typical interview atmosphere was vanished from the studio. It had become a public reckoning, not to pass judgment, but to listen. With her palm still resting on a stack of cue cards, now all but worthless, Elena sat. The stage lights emphasized both women, representing two seemingly contradictory worlds, conservative politics and Hollywood, but uniting at their most common need to be understood and trusted. After a few moments of silence, Ellen smiled, her grin this time kinder and more genuine. She gave a little nod that only those nearby saw. "Karoline," she said via the microphone, her voice clear yet fading, "you spoke today with a fearlessness that few in my industry would dare to exhibit on this platform, despite the fact that I disagree with many of your ideas. Thank you for attending." The bravery of a young woman who entered enemy territory without deserting was once again recognized with a thunderous but sincere ovation. A little smile that looked like the last of the sunset went across Karine's face as she nodded in acknowledgement. "Thank you for having me, Ellen. Regardless of our disagreements, I believe that communication is the most effective approach to keep America from falling apart." Ellen turned to the audience as she was about to wrap up. She said, "Ladies and gentlemen," looking at faces that were still motionless in thought, "we just had a challenging conversation, and maybe it's exactly what our country needs right now. Not simple, but real." Thank you, Karoline Leavitt. Thank you for watching. I'm hoping to see you on the next edition of Ellen DeGeneres' show. The lights went out while the theme song was playing. As Karoline walked off the stage in the last of the light, her cross necklace kept glimmering like an extinguished light bulb. A few audience members came up to her, shook her hand, and expressed gratitude. "You reminded me of my father's time when faith was something to be proud of," said a composed old guy. After saying a prayer of gratitude, Liv crept backstage and gently touched the cross. Her phone rang with a message from President Trump. "You did a great job." What they needed to see was that. She smiled a bit, not because she was receiving accolades, but because she believed that God had enabled her to get beyond the challenge. A bright-eyed assistant named Maddie ran over. "Karine, you're becoming viral on the internet." Leavitt nodded, but refrained from looking at her phone. "Later," she said quietly. "We are not yet done." Backstage, Ellen stood with makeup covering her pale face while her production team surrounded her, shouting at her. 2 million people have viewed the video of Ellen mocking the crucifix, according to one estimate. There is division among the audience. Half of people are calling her a hypocrite. Half of them are defending her. Ellen clenched her hands, her gaze distant. She tried to smile, but it was not enough to mask her inner turmoil. A producer recently said, "We need a public apology now." Helen shook her head and spoke dryly. "No, that'll only make it worse." She felt hollow inside, though, as if she had lost something significant. The internet blew up outside the studio. On social media, snippets of the interview went viral. The cross must be captured on video. The photo was shared by millions of people with the caption, "She didn't just defend faith, she defended us." Conservative commentators hailed Leavitt as a leader for the future. Still, many liberal activists reluctantly admitted that Ellen had gone too far. According to a Texas pastor's article, Karoline Leavitt turned the cross into a symbol of hope on the Hollywood stage. It garnered hundreds of shares, along with an image of the cross glowing under the stage lights. Leavitt's remarks became viral in brief bursts. A young girl with a crucifix necklace posted an emotional video. "I used to feel ashamed of my faith, but Karoline made me proud of it." The video received 5 million views in a matter of hours. A film about losing his employment and finding hope via the principles it promotes was created by a dad in Ohio who was clutching a crucifix. He went on, his voice trembling, "She spoke for us." Stories like these spread, turning Leavitt from a politician into a symbol of the forgotten. When the lecture stopped, some audience members remained seated in the studio. A single mother with a frayed jacket was requested to accept a handwritten note from a stagehand. Her friends teased her, so she wrote, "My daughter," and stopped praying. "Because of you, she wore her cross one more time today." The simple note affected Leavitt like a precious gem when she read it after the concert. She bowed her head and said, "God, thank you, God, for using me." Meanwhile, Ellen's workplace was a mess. Sponsors called, worried about the response. Ellen was given a disillusioned look by an experienced employee who was wearing a crucifix under his shirt inconspicuously. "She didn't just defend the cross," he said, in a firm but kind manner. "She advocated for those like me who believe Hollywood has overlooked them." Ellen didn't respond, but his words made her turn away and blur her vision. The mainstream media took over. Leavitt turns cross into symbol of social responsibility. A story on Fox News commended her for defending religious convictions in politics. CNN's more cautious experts tackled the question, did Ellen go too far mocking the cross? A liberal observer said Leavitt turned the interview into a cultural event. She discussed more than simply politics. She discussed individuals. Articles on Leavitt surfaced in publications ranging from The Washington Post to Breitbart, sparking a national conversation. Social media was dominated by hashtags. Wearing crosses, number Leavitt stands became a symbol for those who felt represented, whether they lived in rural or urban areas. As one college student wrote in a post, "Karoline made me realize faith isn't something to hide, it's strength to change." People who expressed their personal experiences of their faith being mocked posted thousands of comments. A Georgia group thanked Leavitt for bringing the cross into the political limelight during an online prayer session. With the cross still gleaming on her breast, Leavitt went back to her room and sat alone after the concert. In the gathering, she read another letter from a soldier who described how his faith and the policies she supported helped him rediscover the meaning of life. She prayed, her head lowered, "Lord, use me to bring your light to more people." The media frenzy was just the beginning, and she knew it. Her crucifix, which was once the target of mockery, has come to symbolize social responsibility in politics and the heart of a nation searching for hope among its gloom. In her lavish Los Angeles apartment, Ellen DeGeneres sat quietly, the faint glow of a desk lamp casting a shadow over her worried face. The wound from the interview with Karoline Leavitt was still open, and the media storm was still blazing. Posts were cut like blades, viral videos spread like wildfire, and headlines clung like vices. Ellen fails when it comes to the cross. Leavitt exposes Ellen's hypocrisy. She paused at one online comment. Ellen was once my glimmer of hope, but she has since let me down. The words were like a blade piercing the armor she had built up over the years. Ellen rose and stepped out onto the balcony, the chilly night air doing little to calm the turbulence in her mind. She recalled the moment Leavitt touched her crucifix, its brightness illuminating a world she had tried to avoid like a candle. She had thought it was only a symbol, an easy item to mock to justify her kind image. But all of a sudden she felt as though she had touched a power beyond her understanding, and that it was silently condemning her. Memories of her childhood in Louisiana flooded back like an old reel of film. Her mother, a humble woman who always wore a silver cross around her neck, told her that sincerity, not theatrics, must be the source of true compassion. Ellen had given up that faith when she entered Hollywood, where fame and acclaim obscured all morality. But instead of the inspirational speaker, she witnessed a stranger mocking the cross to get points when she rewatched the interview. She wondered if her audience had shaped her into a particular image, or if she was still herself. She drove to a little suburban church that she and her mother had attended as children. Despite the magnificent night sky, the church was silent, lit only by the burning candles on the altar. The large crucifix in front of her seemed to be calmly watching her from the back row. "Mom," she murmured, her voice broken, "where did I lose my way?" A nun, who did not recognize Ellen, appeared with her silver hair concealed by a veil. She said, "What are you looking for, child?" Ellen hesitated before continuing, "A path to find my way back." The nun smiled. "The first step on that path is to listen to your heart." Ellen pulled out her phone and replayed the interview video. When Leavitt said that the cross is necessary, she hesitated. She realized that in addition to offending Leavitt, she had defended millions of people who wore crosses and followed the simple religion that her mother had once cherished. She recalled being taken by her mother as a child to a soup kitchen where folks wearing crosses cheerfully helped the poor. She had lost sight of the compassion that pierced Hollywood's glitter and glamour. She found an ancient box in her closet that contained a little, battered leather Bible that her mother had given her. Then she opened a poem. "The truth will set you free." John 8:32. The words shone like a ray of light through the darkness in her soul. She wasn't religious, but she suddenly felt compelled to look at herself, as if the cross, which she had previously rejected, were calling her to do so. Taking up a pen, she wrote something down. "Karoline, I was wrong to downplay the cross. I'm trying to understand it." Even though she didn't send it, the act seemed like the start of a new adventure. There was problems for Ellen's squad. Social media criticism was relentless, and sponsor calls came flooding in. A young employee looked sorrowfully at Ellen while surreptitiously carrying a crucifix in her pocket. She wasn't just talking about faith, Karoline said politely but firmly. She spoke for a lot of people, including me, who think Hollywood has forgotten about us. The words hit Ellen like a blast of cold water, and she buried her head in disbelief, unable to respond. She sat in the dark and gazed out the window when she arrived home. The image of the crucifix in the church was still there, not far away, but more like a summons to restore what she had lost, the moral character she had vowed to preserve. For the first time, she wanted to rediscover herself rather than preserve her reputation, but she wasn't ready to embrace religion. She thought back to Leavitt's words, "The cross is a torch." Despite their simplicity, they posed a question that made her soul soar. Was she going to find the light her mother had once welcomed? Ellen got up and placed the Bible on the table, the memory of the open verse that lingered. She sensed a shift, a subtle awakening that was starting to take hold, but she wasn't sure what to do next. The crucifix, which she used to mock, now appeared to be a lighthouse, not just to face the problem, but to explore something greater, maybe the majesty of God. Karoline Leavitt had turned the media flurry that had followed the Ellen DeGeneres show interview into a refreshing breeze from a little hotel room in Los Angeles. She looked out over the city, her cross necklace shining brightly. There were stacks of letters from viewers on the table, praising her for transforming the crucifixion into a representation of perseverance from an Iowa mother, a Florida student, and a Michigan worker. She was given one to read by a teenager. "You made me feel proud, even when my peers teased me for wearing my cross." Leavitt bowed her head and begged, "Lord, use me to bring your light to everyone." When she appeared on popular shows like Hannity and an unexpected CNN interview, she didn't boast about her victory, but instead gave a message of faith and accountability. "There is more to the cross than just jewelry," she said. The statement encourages people to aim higher. Millions of people listened to her, from little towns to major cities. In an Atlanta pastor's Sunday sermon, Karoline Leavitt reminds us that faith can illuminate even politics. When hundreds of people viewed the webcast of the sermon, her crucifix became a symbol for many who felt abandoned. The fight for freedom of religion was booming. During a prayer vigil in Ohio, a community organization lifted crosses high and called for legislation to protect the right to exercise one's religion at work. A bill that was introduced in Texas that would permit teachers to wear crosses without fear of termination was modeled after Leavitt. These were not only political movements. These cultural ripples were sparked by an incident on Ellen's stage. Leavitt appeared in front of a packed church assembly back in Washington, D.C. She talked about a shared objective rather than personal achievement. She went on, "The cross is a reminder that God calls us to love even those who oppose us," her voice ringing like a bell. Using the passage, "Love your enemies," she urged the audience to forgive and build a civilized America. The crowd stood up, cheering like waves, and she realized that God was using her to sow seeds of peace. Ellen stood by the window of her apartment, gazing up at the unclouded blue sky. She wasn't ready for a public apology, but something was changing subtly. Not to pray, but to find serenity, she went to another church. Looking at the cross on the altar, she no longer felt estranged. She said, "Maybe I'm finding the path, Mom." It was not a conversion, but a spark, a determination to lead a more authentic life. Not for the cameras, but for herself. Where the journey will lead her was unknown to her. But the once mocked cross now appeared to be a gentle breeze, softly guiding her. Leavitt's cross, which had formerly been a source of mockery, had transformed into a symbol of hope for those who wore it, as well as for those who had previously doubted it, like Ellen. Powerful, but kind. The narrator's voice soared. It is not triumph, but the opening of hearts that reveals God's beauty. From a spectator to an entire nation, from a young politician to a Hollywood star. The cross had transformed into a bridge that crossed from the darkness of separation to a light of hope and peace. It was straightforward, yet unshakable. The storyline of Karoline Leavitt and Ellen DeGeneres on the Ellen DeGeneres program significantly reflects the contradictions in modern American culture, where politics, religion, and social responsibility occasionally conflict and generate tremendous discord. Leavitt's cross is a symbol of conservative ideas and Catholicism that represents Americans who feel excluded by the media and Hollywood. But Ellen's generosity in the face of pressure to uphold liberal beliefs shows how fame may sometimes take precedence over sincerity. The reality of America divided along ideological lines, yet yearning for union, is reflected in their debate, which centered on the cross and issues like morality, religious freedom, and social obligation. As demonstrated by Ellen's awakening experience, When she confronted her early memories and the church cross, even the most pessimistic individuals may find light when they allow their hearts to open. In addition to highlighting the responsibility that comes with public platforms, the media tsunami from hashtags promoting religious freedom to #LeaveItStands also shows how social media can amplify individual voices. The lesson is that in real-life America, where disagreements over politics and religion may easily turn into hostilities, Leavitt's unyielding defense of personal beliefs, albeit with compassion and responsibility, as she argued for loving even those who oppose, should serve as a lesson for us. As demonstrated by her letter to Leavitt, in which she inquired about the meaning of the cross, Ellen showed us that sincerity only emerges when we are prepared to accept responsibility for our shortcomings. Leavitt promoted laws that protect the weak in order to build a united America where love and religion triumph over diversity. He did this by acting in the community's best interests, listening and forgiving. Subscribe to the channel to read more stories like Karoline Leavitt's about faith and healing. We value your time and look forward to seeing you in the next movie, which will include more inspirational scenes.